Welcome to the Game of Life podcast, where we bring you inspiring softball stories, insightful tips from coaches and players, and explore how the game transcends its boundaries to become a metaphor for life. Whether you're a sports enthusiast, a casual fan, or someone just looking for inspiration, you're in for a treat. We'll unravel the tales that go beyond the scoreboard. Discover how perseverance and hard work on the field translates into resilience in your daily challenges. Learn about teamwork, leadership, and the unwavering spirit that fuels success, not just in sports, but in the game of life. We're back. We had some difficulty finding a time where we were going to podcast this week because, well, life gets in the way, but you're braving the freezing cold up in Chicago, and
you're in Florida.
I'm in Florida right now in a hotel room living my best life, but the
You know
show
what?
must.
You know what? As jealous as I am, I forgive you. And that's actually going to be our topic tonight is forgiveness.
What's there to forgive me for? What do you mean by that? Start off and
Yeah,
explain.
exactly. No, but so we want to talk tonight about forgiveness. And I think this topic is one that, I try to work on. I think a lot of people have a hard time with this. And I know personally, like I have a lot of room for growth in this area too. I think it's something that's super hard to do. So that's what we're going to dive into tonight. So forgiveness in your personal life, forgiveness with relationships, forgiveness with yourself, right? Especially in your sport, right? How do you forgive yourself when you have a bad day, bad game? How do you forgive your teammates? How do you forgive your coworkers? How do you forgive your parents, brother, sister, girlfriend, boyfriend, like whoever? So we're going to dive into all that stuff tonight. What are your
Awesome.
initial thoughts on the word of forgiveness? I'm sure growing up you had to forgive me a decent amount of time.
No, I don't know. You got me on this one a bit, but I feel like it's closely related to gratitude and perspective and being appreciative. And I think if you don't have any regrets and you literally just know where your feet are and live in the moment, all the stuff we've talked about, I think it's easier to forgive people because everybody's on the same page. I think when you don't do things the right way is when you start feeling regret, and then you start feeling certain ways about teams or yourself or coaches or whatever. And if you just do it, if you do things the right way, I don't think you have as many forgiveness issues. Am I on the right track with that?
Yeah, I think the way I try to think about forgiveness, and like I said, I have room for growth too, is I feel like anger is super heavy. And I feel like I try to think about like not forgiving someone is selfish, like not like for me, because it's affecting the way that I go about my life. I kind of see forgiveness as like, okay, let's say you do something that annoys me. Now I'm packing on weight to my life because I'm thinking about it. It's taking up space in my head. Let's say every time you upset me, I add another box that I'm carrying, another box and another box. Like forgiveness is just dropping them, it's letting them go. And I think the biggest misconception with forgiveness is you're not forgetting. Like there's a difference between forgiveness and forget, like the saying forgive and forget. I struggle with that one because that's like saying if someone hurts me 10 times, I should just treat them the same way and let them into my life the same way. That part is what I struggle with, but I think there's a really big difference between forgiving someone and forgetting their actions.
Okay, I love that, and I wrote that down, and I think we just found the name of the episode.
Oh, good.
It's you let it go, but it doesn't mean you have to let them back in your life either, right? You just drop it. It's gone. It's done. I mean, maybe they come back in your life, or I mean, it might not be that deep all the time when we talk about forgiveness, right? But
Yeah.
you move. The important thing is you have to move on.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what the other party does, but you have to move on because you can't control what they're going to do, but you have to move on.
And I honestly think vulnerable moment for me here because this is something that I struggle with personally. I'm a conversation person. Like if someone does me wrong or I do someone wrong, I want the big conversation. I want to talk about it. I want the elephant in the room to come out. And when the other person doesn't reciprocate that, that's when I have a hard time forgiving because there's no closure. So for me, let's say I'm going to use you as an example again because you're right here. But let's say you do something that upsets me. It's so much easier for me to forgive you if you say, you know what? I'm really sorry. Like an apology for me goes a really long way. And when that other person is not willing to apologize, have a conversation, address the conflict, that's where I struggle to drop it because I start going in my head like, well, what would I say to them? What would they say to me? What are they thinking? And it's this big game in your head of trying to guess. Whereas I want to have that not maybe not a big conversation, but I want to have that conversation because it feels big to me.
Well, I mean, we're cut from the same cloth, of course. To me, there's nothing worse than having a situation that there's no end game to. There's no closure to, right? And when you're a teacher, a coach, uh, co-worker, when someone doesn't agree with you or doesn't get along with you, I want to fix it. I want to close it or end it. But sometimes people don't feel the same way back. And that's where forgiveness has to come in. And I've told you this, I think I've said it on the podcast before. I Some of the forgiveness I do personally is when I tell if I was looking somebody right in the face that had some sort of to do with me, and they don't come back and talk to me, but it makes me happy and it helps me forgive when I say, I don't mind being the villain in your story. Just tell everybody what chapter you created me. And that gives me the closure that I otherwise don't have. And it also, I think that's my way of forgiving, right? Like I don't think of it that way, but it's my way of closing it out, which to me, the closure is forgiving. And I know I ran it a little bit about that, but that's the
Well,
point I was trying to get across.
I like it because to your point, it's like I'm sure there's some other closure people out there. I think we're all closure people, to be honest, whether we want to admit it or not. That's just how we're wired. But if the other person won't close it for you or with you, that's your way of closing it on your own. And I think that's super powerful because sometimes you can't force someone to have that conversation. And I think everyone has it. You can think of a relationship right now in your life where you see someone and it's a little awkward because you never had the conversation and it's just not the same. And you've let it linger for so long that now there's just like this elephant in the room every time you see him. Hey, what's up? How you doing? Good, you? And that's it.
Well, but it's even more than that. I mean, I have people that block me on social media when they don't
Well, that's the
like
other
me.
spectrum. Yeah.
But so how do I forgive people when they don't give me that chance? And that's where that saying, I don't mind being the villain, just tell everybody what chapter you created me. That's fine. I've closed you out because when you get blocked on social media, I can't believe I'm talking about that because like 20 years ago that never would have happened, right? You don't know what they're saying about you, but you still have to just take that leap of faith and forgive them. Because
Yeah.
if you're trying to do anything that's not normal in life, and by a challenge, a thinking outside the box, trying to play a sport at the highest level, starting a company, right? Uh, Moving to a city and making new friends, there's going to be people that don't agree with you, and then will be the haters that we like to talk about. But you have to forgive them and let them go.
Yeah. And I think a big piece too, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, is if you have it to do with someone, in the moment is probably not the best time to have the conversation. All of your emotions are elevated, and it's okay to tell someone, like, I just need time, I need a minute, because time helps you with perspective, which I believe helps you with forgiveness, because it's super hard to forgive someone, and the only type of forgiveness I'm ever able to give in the moment is, it's fine. Like, that's what I say, and probably in that tone. And I think we all do it. Like, if you're like, I'm so sorry, it's fine. And that's it. And it's just like a mechanism we use instead of talking about it a day later and being like, you know what, it's okay. Like, no worries. And that makes both parties feel a little bit better.
Yeah, it's hard. And the other part is I try to think to myself when I'm angry at people and I need to forgive them, what are their qualifications to judge me anyways? Like if you haven't played college golf, I don't care what you have to say about me. If you haven't started a podcast, I don't care what you have to say. If you don't coach high school, I don't care. If you don't if you haven't started a business, I don't care. I mean, I'm going on and on and on,
For
but you
those
have
specific areas. Yeah.
yeah, but you have to like most people that you get angry at aren't even attempting to try to do what you do. Because if they're trying to do what you're trying to do, they don't have time to say things that make you angry in the first place. So
Mhm.
sometimes forgiveness, I like when you said forgetting, it's more forgetting for me. Like there's nothing to forgive sometimes for people that don't earn my love and respect in the first place. I think I almost think as we do this podcast, it's easier. It's forgetting. It's not forgiving.
That's really fair. I kind of agree with that too, because at some point, I think I I think sometimes when you go through conflict with someone, it's like you decide to forgive them, and then some people will try to like use that as leverage somehow, like down the road. Be like, oh, well, remember when I forgave you about this? And then it becomes this thing instead of, to your point, forget about it. Clean slate, like it's done. It's over. You dropped it. Like what we were talking about at the beginning. So I think that is a good analogy too. And I think to your point of, what are your credentials of, you judging me or getting mad at me to the point that I'm angry and need to forgive you. It goes back to the saying, like, don't take advice or don't take criticism from people you wouldn't take advice from. And I think about that a lot too. If someone's judging me, would I take advice from that person if I was struggling or if I needed help in some area?
Think about it. You don't see Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen criticizing each other. You don't see you don't see NFL coaches or professional coaches criticizing each other. Who does the criticizing? All the talking heads and the news anchors and the sports networks that need ratings. Like the people that are in the arena together, I mean, they might have their thoughts, but I think it's more of a, I'm battling with you. I'm going to forget about something you said. I'm not going to criticize you and have to forgive you later. And
Yeah.
uh, they there's something to be said for that. Like if you have a circle of people trying to do the same things you're doing, I don't think forgiveness is even an issue. Because even if you and me were mad about something, the forgetting comes into play more than the forgive. There's nothing to forgive because we're just battling. It's the heat of the moment. We just forget it and move on. It might come up. It might resurface. You
Yeah,
could say, "Hey, remember that time I was really mad at you?" But there's no forgiveness. It's forgetting.
I
So
would agree.
I
Yeah.
keep coming to that word like that. I don't know if that's the way this episode was
No,
supposed
I
to,
like it.
to go, but I keep coming to that, and I think that helps me.
And I think to your point, when you said when you're in the arena, like it's not a problem, let's transition to sports a little bit and what forgiveness looks like in that. Because the thing that pops into my mind is, let's say it's bottom of the seventh, two outs, my teammate's up and she gets out. I'm not mad at her. I don't need to forgive her. I'm upset. We're upset together because we're a team and we're in the arena together. Even when I'm watching a sport on TV and I see that last athlete get out, they make the last out of the game, it's like, oh man, like something in your gut feels for him. And it's just in sports, like to your point, you forget about it. You move on. I don't need to forgive my teammates for physical mistakes. So I
Well,
think that's a kind of a great example of it.
the one that most comes to mind is when we were watching the Bills Ravens game together, and the guy for the Ravens dropped the 2-point conversion. And Lamar Jackson went over to him and said, "Man, we're a team. We win together and we lose together. Like there's no need to
Yeah.
forgive. There's nothing to forgive. That's the point. Like in sports, if you're trying your best, there's nothing to forgive.
Yeah.
Like someone's gonna make the last out or drop the last pass or turn the ball over on downs or give up the goal or whatever it is. But if you're trying your best, there's nothing forgiveness happens when you have regrets, like I said early on, or you don't think you tried your best.
Yeah. I think honestly in sports, forgiveness comes the most with the relationship you have with yourself. I mean, I think about the number of times I was more mad at myself than anybody for a performance I had, and I had to learn how to forgive myself. And that has happened so many times in my life too. Like you make a mistake and you gotta give yourself grace. And one thing I tell the girls I coach is they get super down when girls on my team are down on themselves. I'll pick someone else on the team and be like, I'm gonna use you as an example. Be like, guys, what do you think of when you think about Paul? What do you think about? And they all say positive things. And I'm like, do you see how everyone else sees you? Like they see your best moments, not your worst. They see the home run you hit and they see the diving catch you had. They don't see the strikeout you had 4 games ago. They don't see the one ground ball that you missed 2 weeks ago. They see all the good stuff combined. Like imagine if you saw yourself like that. And I think that's super hard to think about in the moment sometimes. And I know it was super hard for me because we get in this bubble of like, oh my gosh, I'm so mad at myself. I hope like you're holding yourself to such a high standard. And then at the end of the day, you're mad at yourself when things go wrong.
Well, let's pivot this to parents a bit, because do you know how much money I spent traveling to watch you your first year or two when you didn't get in for the weekend? Like,
Nope.
how can I forgive you for that? No,
Yeah, yeah,
but sometimes I think parents could do a better job talking to their child athlete afterwards, that maybe forgiveness isn't the word, but forgetting and just being grateful, like I mentioned earlier, about how cool an experience this is, no matter what the outcome is.
yeah. And I think the contingency on that is did they give it their all? Because
Yes.
to me, which we're not talking about right now, but if they didn't give it their all, I probably wouldn't have a hard time forgetting too.
Well, and listen, if you're getting to the point you're watching your child in college, I'm sure they're giving it their all. But we've had lots of behind the scenes discussions about families and why are they even doing it anymore? Because you feel like the child isn't even giving it their all. What's the one thing Mom and I asked you and Jen every year at the end of every travel season?
We wanted to keep playing. Yeah.
And it got to the point we would lose friends if you stopped playing. We would lose the travel if you stopped playing. But if you're not going to give it your all, what's the point, right? And I mean, that's a little bit of a crazy pivot from just the topic of forgiveness, but I think it's still important.
I feel like the thing about forgiveness too is like we've talked about a lot about forgiving others, but sometimes are other people going to want to forgive you? Because sometimes we do things wrong, and I struggle with that a lot. Like I
I don't know what you're
shocking.
talking
No,
about.
I don't. But honestly, like an apology can go a long way. And I think growing up in our family, that's something we learned early on is I think about our family, for example, like there is pretty much not much you could do that I would like need to forgive you for because I know the person that you are.
Right.
Right. And sometimes I struggle with that because if you do something, you're like, oh, you know what? I'm sorry. Like, I can understand what you were thinking, why you did what you did, and like the reason you had for it because I know you. So there's not much where I'm like, I forgive you. It's more of like, it's fine. No worries. Let's forget and move on. Because I think when you have really close relationships with people in your life, that's all you need to do because they know who you are. You've showed them time and time again, year after year, action after action, who you are. And we're not going to bat 1,000 in life either. That's not how it works. Like, we're going to have errors, so to speak. We're going to get out sometimes, but you have to be able to apologize and you have to be able to address the situation most beneficially in person and not via text. But that's another thing,
I'm
too.
writing that down, not going to bat 1,000 in life, because on social media, a lot of people bat 1,000 in life.
Mhm.
So I'm writing that down so I don't have to be so hard on myself.
Yeah, well, I think it's just giving grace too, but I think that is a hard thing too when you want people to forgive you, and doing it on their timeline.
So if I'm following this conversation right, does forgiveness even matter, or is it forgetting that matters?
I think it depends on the person. It can look different
Okay.
for everybody. I think you and I, the way that we're wired, it's maybe a little bit more of a forget, but I think I don't know. It's a hard question. It depends, and it depends on the person, like the perception that they have of both of those words.
That's, I think so it's almost the intent of each.
Mhm.
Like, you know, this is what I love about this podcast, because as we're talking about this, I've got a million things going in my head about this content and about past things in my life. And I'm looking back, I don't think I've ever had the intent to hurt another person or harm another person. So I don't really want their forgiveness. I want them to understand that my intent wasn't to hurt or harm them, and then I'm just going to forget about it. And that's why this has been a crazy topic tonight, because it's just swirling around in my head. And to be fair, we don't always know what we're going to talk about till the other person brings it up. So I'm a little vulnerable in that sense, because I didn't think we were talking about this, but that's just the thoughts going through my head.
Well, hopefully you can forgive me and forget about it.
I'm going to forget about you.
Yeah. No, I think it's a really good topic and something I'm actively trying to work on in my life because I think like I consider us both super passionate people and like we wear our heart on our sleeve, so sometimes that can leave you a little more
Yes.
vulnerable to people hurting you or doing things to you. So I think it's really important to cope with forgive and forget too.
Yeah, I mean, my biggest criticism family members tell me is I talk too much and I say too much. But you know what?
Mm.
I don't care if I'm not hiding anything. Yeah, it could leave me vulnerable, but I'm just telling you what's going through my head, and I'm telling you the intent. The intent of what we think to another human being, and then the impact we have on them. I think that's where we get in trouble sometimes,
I
right?
agree.
You could be a coach that your intent is to make them a better player, but the impact sometimes is it could just be emotionally draining the way you come across to that person. Like you don't mean that. So I feel the more you communicate with everybody, there's no such thing as too much communication if you're being honest. And
Yeah.
that's why I think I'm more in the forgetting camp than the forgiveness camp, because people are going to understand my intent, but they don't either. So, it's so tough.
I think it's hard because to your point, like you know your intent and I know mine and everybody knows their own, but the person on the receiving end doesn't always know my intent. They only know my impact. So when they don't align, that's where, things get a little dicey because I think that's important to understand the difference too, to your point of and even explaining that to somebody, like if they're upset with me, being like, this was my intent and this is where I went wrong with my delivery, and that's why the impact ended up the way that it did. Because if someone told me that, like let's say you said something to me and I was like, whoa, and you're like, that this is what I meant to our episode of what do you mean by that? Like
Right.
this goes exactly along with impact versus intent.
Well, and I think about that. I mean, as a coach, the anger issues from players come when they feel they're not getting their time earned, right? And if I'm being honest, uh, I sometimes I think people have forgiveness issues with you because they don't understand and have the awareness themselves of what is actually happening.
Yeah.
So if you're communicating and you're vulnerable and you're honest, if they don't, if they have issues, okay. But I mean, at the end of the day, if you're an open book, it is what
Yeah.
it is. And that goes back to forgetting, because you can't make them feel the way you want them to feel. And that hurts sometimes, but it is what it
And
is.
the more I think about it, because I think you are more of a forget person, and I think mine a little bit is I need to forgive you in some realm before I can forget. And I think that's because I can't just like drop something in my mind because it's gonna come back eventually. Like I've heard the term before, like you don't get over things, you get through them. And for me, forgiveness is how I get through it a little bit, and then forgetting is how I get rid of it. Because if I just get rid of it, it's gonna circle back at some point for me personally. So I feel like little bit of forgive, then we forget.
I don't know if it comes with age. I mean, right now I'm more of a forget and just flush it type person. Like I don't have time. I don't have time. Like you can think whatever you want, and it is what it is.
That's
And
fair.
but sometimes I think that comes with age and perspective and experience. I mean, if you could
Yeah.
feel that way, if I could feel the way I feel now when I was 22, I mean, hell, I'd be coaching the Olympic softball team right now, I think.
I think we just all need to remember not being able to forgive is really, really heavy. Think
Yes.
about those, analogy where you hold a glass of water, you hold it for 30 seconds, not that heavy. You hold it for 2 hours, you can't move. And I feel like that's kind of like forgiveness because the longer you hold on to it, it's hurting you more than the person who hurt you now.
Yeah, you're talking my language. I mean, I think in season one at some point I was telling you about how I used to have players empty the cup. Like you literally have to empty the cup before you come in. And they're gonna have you empty the cup. But there's nothing like practice or your teammates. It's all just a small percentage of the day. But so is work and so is your family. Like you only see people in small chunks throughout the day.
Yeah.
So every time you come across new people, you have to be empty and you have to forgive and forget because if you hold on to that, man, that's where the
So
blowups happen.
here's my final analogy. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Yeah. Here's my final analogy. Are you ready for it?
Yep.
All right. So you're holding a cup. Dumping out the cup is forgiveness. Throwing it is forgetting. You dump and you forget. That's forgive and forget right there.
All right. Are you saying you dump or throw it? Because I'll throw it. You're dumping, I'm
No, I'm
throwing.
saying dumping is forgiving. Throwing is forgetting.
So what would
So
you
if
do?
you throw it with the water in it, that might be a problem.
No, no, you toss it over your shoulder,
Oh,
right?
all right, all right, all right.
That's what I thought you were saying. You either dump it or you toss it.
Okay.
Are we getting too into it by now?
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, this was awesome. We should have a guest next week. Things will start settling down. But I was just talking, you know me, you're not going to believe this. When we're down in Florida and we go out to eat or I'm walking on the beach, I talk to strangers.
What?
I know.
Yeah.
I think there's a sign on my head that says talk to me. And when I tell people we have a podcast, it blows their mind. And most of the time people are like, "Oh, I always wanted to do that." And I'm like, "Well, why don't you do it?" And then they ask me why we do it. I'm like, I get a chance to talk to my daughter every week. Like, so these conversations, sometimes we don't know what we're talking about or where it's going to go, and we surprise each other. Not a gotcha, but a surprise. To me, that's the most invigorating and most challenging type of conversation that makes you feel alive. So I appreciate this.
Yeah. No, I love it. And we're grateful to all you guys listening out there too. So it's really cool to hear your feedback all the time.
Awesome. Hey, we're getting close. Well, it is college softball season right now. I know we've been watching. We text all the time on weekends. Oh my gosh, did
Yeah.
you see this? Did you see that? But
Yeah.
March 17th is high school season for me. I don't know when it starts out in Chicago. Do you know?
Soon. Soon.
It's got to
But
be
this is my
soon.
PSA to all the young girls out there. Watching softball is one of the best ways to learn. So plant yourself down somewhere over the weekend and watch some softball. So,
Don't watch it in school though, on your phone. You'll get in
no,
trouble.
I said this weekend. I said this weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All
All
right.
right.
See ya.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.